What if I told you the most powerful weapon in any conversation isn't what you say, but what you don't say? The silence you hear right now could be the very tool that's shaping your thoughts, decisions, and even your reality. Imagine a room where every word feels heavy, then the speaker stops, and the air itself seems to press against you. That pause can pressure you into agreement, hide a hidden agenda, and make you feel guilty without a single word. Ever left a meeting feeling uneasy because nothing was said? Stay with me, because we're about to decode the silent art of manipulation. I still remember the day a colleague stared at a contract, then simply closed his mouth. The silence stretched, and I could feel my heart race, my mind scrambling for a reason to fill the void. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just being quiet, he was steering the conversation without uttering a single line. This is what we call manipulation via silence. The intentional use of pauses, withholding information, and strategic quiet to influence thoughts or actions. It matters because whether you're in a boardroom, a family dinner, or a casual chat, silence pulls on our brain's need for closure and our instinct to read social cues. In the next 10 minutes, you'll learn 3 proven psychological tricks behind silent manipulation, see real-world examples, and discover how to protect yourself, plus a powerful counter technique you can start using today.
If this is blowing your mind, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep exploring together.
Now, let's dive into the first trick, the pressure pause. Picture 2 salespeople on opposite sides of a table. One rattles off numbers, features, and benefits, never missing a beat. The other delivers the price, then simply sits still, eyes locked, mouth closed. That lingering silence isn't an accident, it's a weapon. Psychologically, humans hate uncertainty. When a pause hangs in the air, our brain creates discomfort, a need for closure that pushes us to fill the gap. We start to assume the speaker's intent, often aligning with the implied request because we want the tension to dissolve. Think about a negotiation I witnessed years ago. A manager announced, "The budget is $10,000, then fell silent. The counterpart, feeling the weight of that quiet, blurted out, "We can stretch to 12,000. The manager's silence had nudged the other side to overcompensate, just to break the uneasy stillness. Researchers at the Journal of Applied Psychology found that a pause of 5 seconds after a request can increase compliance by nearly 30%. In a simple role play, an actor asked for a favor, waited, and the listener agreed half the time versus almost never when the request was followed by rapid chatter. The takeaway here is simple. When you feel a sudden, uncomfortable quiet after someone presents an idea or a number, recognize that it may be a pressure pause. The silence is designed to make you fill the void with agreement. Notice it, pause yourself, and give yourself a moment to think before you respond. Moving on, there's a subtler, more insidious tactic that hides behind the same quiet, silent exclusion. But before we get there, let's reflect on how the pressure pause just showed us how silence can steer outcomes without a single word. Now, imagine you are at a family dinner and a teenager asks, "What's the plan for the weekend?" The adults exchange glances, then simply stay silent. The quiet hangs in the room like a heavy curtain, and the teen's eyes flicker with uncertainty. That moment of silence is not just an absence of words. It is a deliberate omission that forces the youngster to keep probing, to keep asking, until someone finally gives an answer, often the one that the adults want to hear. In that pause, the teen feels excluded, as if there is a secret they are not allowed to know, and the pressure builds until the silence is broken on the adult's terms. Psychologically, the brain treats social exclusion almost like physical pain. Studies in neuropsychology have shown that when people are ignored, the same regions of the brain that light up during physical injury become active. The discomfort is real, and it drives us to seek connection, to fill the void left by the missing information. When a speaker intentionally withholds a response, they are exploiting that innate need for inclusion. The target, desperate for the missing piece, may agree to ideas, decisions, or actions simply to regain a sense of belonging. Let me walk you through a corporate scenario that illustrates this perfectly. In a quarterly meeting, a project lead presents a timeline, and then, without offering any details about the budget, simply looks at the team and says, "We'll discuss that later." The room fills with a low hum of speculation. Team members start filling the silence with their own assumptions, often aligning with the lead's hidden agenda. By the time the budget is finally disclosed, the team has already committed to a course of action that feels inevitable. Even though the crucial financial constraints were never addressed up front, the silence acted as a gatekeeper, steering the conversation in a direction that served the lead's interests while keeping the team in a state of uncertainty. So how can you spot this silent exclusion in real time? One telltale sign is the sudden drop in verbal activity right after a key question is asked, especially when the question is about something that could influence decisions or power dynamics. If the response is a pause that stretches longer than a normal thinking moment, treat it as a red flag. At that point, ask a clarifying question that forces the silence to break. Simple prompts like, "Can you elaborate on that?" Or, "What does that mean for the next steps?" can pull the hidden information into the light and neutralize the manipulative quiet. Now, let's move to the third and perhaps most covert silent tactic, the guilt-laden vacuum. This is the kind of silence that makes you feel personally responsible for an unresolved tension, even though no one has said a word. Picture a therapist's office where the client shares a painful experience, and the therapist remains mute for a few beats, allowing the weight of the story to sink in. In a manipulative context, that same pause can be weaponized. A partner may recount a grievance, and the other simply looks away, maintaining a deadpan expression. The silence forces the speaker to fill the space, often with self-blame or exaggerated apologies, because the lack of response feels like disapproval or disappointment. The underlying mechanism here is guilt induction through ambiguity. Humans are wired to seek approval from others. When feedback is absent, we assume the worst. The silent observer becomes a mirror that reflects our own insecurities back at us, prompting us to overcompensate with concessions or admissions that we might not have made otherwise. Research in social psychology indicates that when individuals experience ambiguous silence after disclosing a personal failing, they are more likely to increase prosocial behavior to regain perceived acceptance. In other words, the silence nudges you to behave in a way that satisfies the unspoken expectations of the silent party. A real-world illustration comes from a sales environment where a customer shares concerns about a product's durability. The salesperson, instead of responding directly, leans back, folds their arms, and maintains a stoic silence. The customer, feeling the pressure of the unacknowledged concern, may start offering additional justifications for why they might still purchase the item, or they may lower their expectations to avoid conflict. The silence has shifted the power dynamic, subtly coercing the buyer into a compromise that serves the salesperson's goal. To protect yourself from this guilt-laden vacuum, you need to reintroduce explicit feedback into the conversation. When you notice a partner or colleague falling silent after you've expressed vulnerability, ask, "How does that sound to you?" Or, "Do you have any thoughts on what I just shared?" By inviting a verbal response, you prevent the silent pause from becoming a breeding ground for guilt and self-doubt. At this point, you might be wondering whether there's a universal antidote that works against all three silent manipulation techniques.
The answer is both simple and surprisingly powerful. Intentional, controlled verbal anchoring.
This means responding to a pause not with another pause, but with a concise, purpose-driven statement that reasserts your own agency. For the pressure pause, you could say, "I need a moment to think about that," and then actually take the time you need before replying. For silent exclusion, you might interject, "I'm missing some key details. Can we go over the numbers again?" And for the guilt-laden vacuum, you could respond, "I appreciate your listening, but I'd like to hear your perspective on this." Each of these anchored responses serves two functions. It breaks the manipulative silence, and it re-established a clear line of communication that limits the other party's ability to steer the conversation through quiet. Let's put this into practice with a quick role-play scenario. Imagine you're in a negotiation over a freelance contract. The client says, "The budget is $5,000, and then falls silent. Instead of letting the pressure build, you calmly reply, "I hear that figure, and I'll need to assess the scope before confirming." You pause, gather your thoughts, and then continue. "Given the deliverables we discussed, I would need $8,000 to meet the quality standards we both expect." By doing this, You have inserted a verbal anchor that acknowledges the client's silence, but also redirects the conversation toward a concrete discussion of value, removing the coercive effect of the original pause. In a team meeting where a manager omits critical budget data, you could interject, "I'm noticing a gap in the financial overview. Could we walk through those numbers together?" This not only fills the silent exclusion but also signals to the group that transparency is a priority. And in a personal relationship where your partner's silence makes you feel guilty, you might say, "I sense something is off. I'd like to understand how you're feeling so we can address it together." By explicitly inviting dialogue, you turn the silent vacuum into an opportunity for mutual understanding rather than a tool for manipulation. Now, let's recap the 3 silent tactics we've uncovered. First, the pressure pause leverages our discomfort with uncertainty, nudging us toward compliance. Second, silent exclusion exploits our deep-seated need for inclusion, prompting us to fill informational gaps in ways that may align with hidden agendas. Third, the guilt-laden vacuum uses ambiguous silence to trigger self-blame, driving us to overcompensate in order to regain perceived approval. In each case, the common thread is that silence is being used deliberately to shape outcomes without saying a single word. The good news is that awareness is the first line of defense. By recognizing the pattern's long pauses after requests, sudden drops in conversation after key questions, and silent stares following emotional disclosures, you can interrupt the manipulative flow before it takes hold. Pair that awareness with the practice of intentional verbal anchoring, and you gain a reliable toolkit for maintaining control over your own decisions and emotions.